I'm Amy Blumenfeld, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Amy Blumenfeld.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. I am your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And while you're there, please click on the subscribe links over in the right-hand sidebar. You can subscribe on your Android phone, your iPhone, it's Stitcher Radio. Anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Author Stories. We're also on YouTube. There's a link over in the right-hand sidebar as well. And you can subscribe there and never miss an episode. Today's episode is sponsored by the AIPP, the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. If you are an indie author and you need to build a support team to help you format your book, edit your book, get a cover designed for your book, anything that an indie author needs to get their book out there, the AIPP has a member that can help you make your book, your product, the very best it can be. If you look in the show notes at the bottom of this episode, you'll find a link to the AIPP, or go to aipponline.org/members and browse through the member library and find the professional to fill out your team. Like I said, anything that you need to make your indie publishing journey a success, there's a member there to help. It's a very simple website, very easy to navigate through. Go check out aipponline.org/members today and fill out your indie author team. At the end of the show, be sure to stick around for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thanks for listening. He enlisted for the money. He stayed for the girl. Gateway to the Galaxy, the new series everyone is talking about, beginning with Book 1, Into the Breach. Frank and Marine Space Corps 1 find themselves across the galaxy in a WWE smackdown with the legions of a boss-level villain. But the party's just getting started. He donned the mantle of a celestial knight to impress a girl, well, an empress. Now destiny's calling in a debt. A lightning-paced military fantasy full of outlandish comedy and impossible situations that will have you hailing for these Marines from the get-go. For fans of Green Lantern and the Stargate universe. Listen to what some readers are saying. This is good stuff. Thanks for the new obsession. I recommend and can't wait for the next book. And the visual pictures and action are amazing. They're getting the band back together. And this time, it's serious nonsense. Pick up the Gateway to the Galaxy series by Jonathan Yanez and J.R. Castle, available now on Amazon.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. Gateway to the Galaxy.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have Amy Blumenfeld on the show with me. She has a fantastic new book. Her debut book is called The Cast, and it's out everywhere now. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Amy, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I think my first memory was probably the fact that I actually enjoyed writing thank you notes as a kid. And the other little clue was probably that I really enjoyed writing letters to my friends in sleepaway camp. I didn't go to sleepaway camp. I never wanted to go, but a lot of my friends did, and I would write these crazy, make-believe stories, and they enjoyed them. So.
Oh, that's funny. How old were you?
Oh, probably 9, 10, around then.
Nice. Were you a big reader as a kid?
I was not a huge reader. I mean, I was certainly a reader, but I wasn't, a voracious reader. I would say I was well-rounded.
That's great.
I did a lot of dance. I did a lot of, sports and, art and things like that. And I loved reading, too, but I was not one of these kids who was constantly under her covers at night with a flashlight.
Right. When you wrote those stories to your friends at sleepaway camp, was there ever a common thread there, or was these just kind of the wild musings of a 9-year-old?
Exactly, the latter.
Oh, that's so awesome. At what point did you did anyone recognize, like in school or maybe your parents or anything like that there was maybe a gifting in storytelling or writing? Was there ever a teacher or anything that kind of noticed that about you?
In third grade, actually, around the time of those sleepaway camp letters, I had a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Pollock, and she really encouraged creative writing for the first time. And I loved it. And she told my mom that, I had a talent for it, or just I enjoyed the class a lot. And I think, she really encouraged me. And that stayed with me for years. And then as I got older, especially in college, I realized that I actually enjoyed writing papers. I did not like the classes where you had to take a test
right.
As much but I really found that I learned a lot, and I enjoyed the process of researching and interviewing and, even staying up late the night before a deadline. I kind of enjoyed it. And so that sort of helped guide me in terms of my career.
Well, it's one of the sad things about the education system, and my oldest son is an English teacher, and so we definitely support our educators, and that. But there's everybody's different, and I was a horrible test taker. But if you gave me the assignment to write an essay or a piece of fiction, it didn't even have to be fiction. It could be something about a history lesson we were studying. But if I could take that and put my own spin on it or tell the story the way I understood it, that I love that. So
yeah.
I'm glad
people
to hear
have
that.
to, yeah.
I'm glad to hear other people like that too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think people have to realize kids and adults, too, learn in different ways. People are auditory learners or visual learners. Some people are better, like we are, with writing papers versus taking tests, or vice versa. My husband is an excellent test taker, but didn't enjoy the term paper writing, whereas I did. So everyone's different.
Right. What did you study in college?
I was an American Studies major in college, and then I got my master's degree right after in journalism.
Wow. Did you work as a journalist?
I did. I did for several years. So right after graduation, I worked at American Health Magazine for a couple of years, and then I went to George Magazine, and I was editing, and I also wrote a bunch of articles for them. And then when George folded, I had been working for several months on a story about the children of former U.S. presidents and the experience of growing up in the White House. And we had laid out the whole thing, and it was photographed, and it was edited, and we folded with that issue. And so the editor at the time of George, Frank Lawley, he set up a meeting with People magazine. And so I went to People, I met with them, and they decided that they wanted me to continue working on the story for them. And so a couple of months later, there was a news item about the Bush daughters, George W. Bush's daughters, Jenna and Barbara,
right.
And they slapped a picture of them on the cover and did this short news bit about them, and then linked it to this feature that I had been working on about growing up in the White House. And after that, I was freelancing for Oprah and Self and several other magazines.
Little startups.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. I've talked to a lot of journalists that have gone on to write fiction, and I find that journalists have a really interesting take on creating fiction. Do you notice that your time as a journalist informs or helps your fiction writing in any way?
I think it did. I think I was really paying attention to details, and I think I got that from my experience as a journalist. I also just naturally enjoy eavesdropping. And so, when you're a journalist, obviously you stick to the facts.
Right.
But I had so much more freedom. So, yes, I paid attention, I think in part thanks to my background in nonfiction to all of the details. But then I just felt such independence and freedom to just have fun with the fiction, which I had never done before. And so I really, really enjoyed this process. And these characters that I created are, they're lifted from truth, but they're not actual people. And I ran with it, and they became my imaginary friends.
Oh, I love it. You talk about that journalism is, just the facts and sticking to reporting on what we see, or maybe uncovering the truth of something. But one of the things that separates journalists is the ability for 4 different people to look at a singular situation and come away with a different take on that story and a different way of telling it. And so to me, it seems that journalism and fiction writing are very close cousins, because you're reporting the facts, but you've got to do it in an engaging way that makes people want to keep reading and feel connected to the people in that story.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you bring that up, because this book, my book, The Cast, it focuses on a group of friends, and I write it from different perspectives of kids of now adults who experience the same experience of watching a childhood friend battle a life-threatening illness, and each of them sort of walked away. Each of them was affected by it deeply, but had a different takeaway, and it shaped them in different ways. And so it's almost similar to what you're saying.
Wow. Speaking of your book, The Cast, it was informed by some real life experiences, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yes. It's no secret that I had cancer as a child, and this book was certainly inspired by my experience. It is 100% fiction, but there were a few things that really inspired the story. One of them was this videotape. So I got the idea for this Saturday Night Live style videotape because that was actually a gift that was given to me. It was not by my peers, by a group of kids, but it was done by 40 people, 10 families at the synagogue community that I grew up in Queens, New York. I was my parents' friends and their children, and they made a videotape called Amy Night Live. And that carried me through. It kept me laughing through my recovery. And so I just thought that was the most generous, thoughtful gift that anyone could have given me, because it kept me laughing. And so they weren't doctors. They couldn't, heal me with medicine, but they certainly, laughter was the best medicine, and they got me through that. And so this book is, I use that as a springboard. The second source of inspiration was when I was in graduate school. I wrote about adult survivors of childhood cancer, and I'd interviewed several patients and survivors, their family and loved ones. And at graduation, my professor suggested that I turn it into a book, and I'm sure that he meant some form of either a memoir or nonfiction, like a series of interviews. But, over the years, I didn't have time to write a book. I had to have a job with health insurance and a salary, and I would sock away chapters here and there whenever I had some downtime, but it never gelled. It never felt right. It never clicked. And then when I turned 40, my friends and I were sort of talking about where we were in our lives and, what we hope to still accomplish and, parenting issues, relationship issues. And so I was taking those conversations and I said, well, why don't I take the messages that were in that master's project and the things that I talk about if I speak at a fundraiser for a cancer organization or hospital and just create these characters that are relatable. I didn't want to write something that was heavy. I didn't want to write a cancer book, but there was something in me that wanted to still convey those important messages, but do it in a fun, beach ready type of way. And my friends, some of my friends who had multiple kids would say, I just felt there was a third child in me. I felt there was another kid in me. But I felt that there's this book in me, and I knew for years I needed to give birth to it, and I just didn't know what format it would be. And it took a while to figure it out. But once it clicked, it clicked.
It's really interesting that you talk about the master's work that you did with the families of cancer survivors, and when you've dealt with serious illness like that in your family, there is a certain type of humor. Sometimes it's gallows humor. Sometimes it's but it's just the way that you deal with things like that. And sometimes when you've been through something like that, it almost is impossible to write something heavy and dark around it, because a lot of times that thread of humor is what's kept you going all along. And sometimes people don't understand that, and they feel like you're being disrespectful maybe. But it's actually kind of the opposite of that, isn't it?
Well, listen, everybody has their own, way of dealing with things, but for me, humor and hope and just normalcy, to be perfectly honest, keeping my everyday routine, that was what got us through it. I remember my parents, I was in 9th grade, and my parents insisted I keep up with my homework. I was in an isolation room for 2 months at Sloan Kettering here in New York, and I took my biology and my math Regents exams. And the doctors and the nurses helped me study for them. These are those state-mandated exams. They posted my scores in the nurses' station, but sticking to the everyday. And even my dad, and my mom, they kept their jobs. They went to work. But they never left me alone. One of them was always staying with me at night. Wow. But keeping that normalcy, keeping the laughter, for us, that's what worked.
Yeah. Through tragedy and hard times and conflict, a lot of times that is the breeding ground for creativity in some weird way. Do you feel like that experience that you went through fed you creatively? Maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but is that something that you can look back on and draw from?
It was certainly a formative life experience for me, and it wasn't just that experience. It was the ripple effect that was created. And, I feel very, very, very fortunate and blessed to have had this in an age when, there were much higher cure rates. Years ago, if you had, childhood cancer, the odds were not in your favor. But over the years, the cure rates have skyrocketed. And I feel like I'm very much on the forefront of that. And so it was that experience, but also the experience of, as I said, the ripple effect of, these little things creep up from time to time, and that was something that I wanted to pay tribute to in the book also. And also, not just that it affected me, but it affects your family and affects your loved ones and your friends in a wholly different way that it impacts you. And also in the future, it can impact your spouse or your child and so on. So it was that formative experience, but also the impact, on dating, for instance. What do you do? And this is something that I talked about in my master's project. You start dating somebody, and there's a chance you may be infertile as a result of the radiation and the chemotherapy or any kind of treatment that you've had. At what point do you tell that person? Do you tell them right off the bat on the first date and they think you're insane because you're planning your bridal registry? Or do you wait but then risk losing someone you've already grown to love? Oh. And that's true of anything. That's not just cancer. That could be anything that someone has gone through. And then, okay, let's say you do have a child and you do explain that to them. At what point do you tell them about your history? In my case, with my daughter, I've written about this, but she's biologically me and my husband, but we used a surrogate to have her. And so one day in kindergarten, she was playing, and they were playing with dolls, and all of her friends were putting dolls under their shirts, and she didn't. And they said, "Where's your baby?" She's like, "Oh, my friend is going to carry my baby for me." So that was an interesting ripple effect, because then, the next day at pickup, one of the moms comes up, she's like, "So, my daughter came home with an interesting story." So, it's all of these ripple effects, which have definitely informed. And I took, some of those experiences and put them in the book, but they're, again, they're fictionalized versions of what actually happened.
Right. So we we see the formative experiences and the things that informed what this book became to be. But what was the catalyst that got you started on this book? You talked about feeling like that you had this book in you that you needed to birth. Was there anything that happened that let you know, okay, now is the time to do this?
I think just turning 40 and talking to my friends about where we were in our lives, and this is something on my bucket list. I really wanted to get this done. And so I think the conversations that I was having with my friends, everybody was sort of at a crossroads, whether it was, a relationship or a job or just something going on in their family. And I think I was taking those stories and really inspired by them and just sort of put it all in a blender in my head, and it ended up as this.
Wow. Did you begin with a certain character, with a setting? I'm always intrigued by how stories form, what that first kernel is that it grows out of.
I created the characters first.
Okay.
That was the very first thing I did. I had these chapters I had socked away with these messages. There were interviews with other people. There were thoughts that I had. But each one, they had a message. But I needed the characters. I needed people that were relatable and people I would be friends with, people I would want to read about. My friends would want to take to a beach. That's the kind of book that I wanted to read, that I wanted to write, because that was what I wanted to read. And so I started with the characters. I started with these colorful characters, and I remember just typing away on my computer about their stories and just making up their backstories. And that was the springboard. And so through their stories, I was able to weave in parenting issues, relationship issues, religious issues, health issues. So each of the characters in the cast is dealing with some sort of life issue. Like one character is in a passionless marriage. She got the white picket fence, the 3 kids, the minivan, the beautiful house, the successful husband, the whole thing that she dreamed of. But she realizes, several years into her marriage, that she loves him. He's her best friend, but there's no passion. So what does she do? That's one character. Another character, it's a modern Orthodox Jewish couple, and for years they struggled with fertility. They're highly successful, but just were not fulfilled, and here they are on the cusp of parenthood, and one of them decides that they don't want to be as observant as they have been, and the other one wants to maintain their level of observance. And so how do you reconcile that? And then another couple is faced with a medical crisis. And so what I was really fascinated by was, how do you, when there's love and when there's respect, how do you move on if you fundamentally disagree about something that's big, whether it's a medical issue, a religious issue, or your marriage or something? How do you agree to disagree, and how do you move on from that?
Wow. So as you developed these characters and started looking at their lives and kind of pulling lifting the shades of and looking inside past the facade that everyone puts on, there's drama in, and drama gets overused now in a negative connotation, but there is dramatic things going on in everyone's lives, and you don't need explosions and spy thrillers to really get the tension of everyday life, do you?
No, you infuse it with humor and like little details. No, it doesn't have to explode here and there, but it's percolating. It's on like a low simmer,
right. Right.
And then occasionally the flames go up, but for the most part it's on a low simmer. Right. But you have to build the tension, and that was something I needed to learn, because that's not something that I did in journalism as much.
Right. Well, that's a next question, is how do you, when you develop these characters and you see them and you as the writer start caring about them, how do you build tension for them and separate yourself to allow them to go
get
too
hurt?
hard, to get hurt? Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you
really
do that?
hard. It's interesting because I did, a couple of drafts of this. So after my first draft, I gave it to some readers, and people were telling me I was too nice to my characters. They needed a little bit more drama, and they said that the ending was too perfect. So they said everybody was it was like a perfect, nice little red bow that was tied on it. And because I didn't want anybody to get hurt, I wanted them to struggle, but then ultimately be okay in the end. And so people were saying it was too predictable. And so I went back and I revised. I revised the ending. The ending completely changed, and now there's a big twist at the end. But I went back and I, added some nuance and and layers to it to make them suffer a little bit more.
And it's really satisfying when that works, when you do something to your character, and it's not as beautiful as you originally intended, but it's more real, and it connects really on a gut level, and there's a satisfaction in that, isn't there?
There is, and yes, and so even though it hurt to do this at the end of the story, to do this to this one character, it actually, I think it strengthened the book, and it also added to some of the themes I think of in the book, which is this is about real life and about authenticity and about things happen, and it's how you handle those hiccups in life, and you do it surrounded by friends, hopefully, who will support you.
Right. How long did it take you to get through this book, for the writing of it?
The writing of it took a few years. It took a year to do the first draft. I would say I revised it and tweaked over probably, the next year. And then we really polished it, and I got, the whole publishing process going.
Right. So now on the other side of it, the book is out now. People are getting their copies of it, and this experience, this culmination of experiences that you went through, and then these characters that you brought to life are now out for people to see. What is that feeling like for you?
I'm thrilled. I'm scared, but I'm thrilled that it's finally done. I'm excited for people to really think about some of these issues, and I hope that I'm raising awareness to, like I said before, the ripple effect, that it's not just this one experience that happens, with childhood cancer survivorship. It really impacts the patient and their loved ones and their friends and family, and even later, on their spouse and their, or partner and their children. Everyone is somehow impacted. It's like this pebble that's thrown into the water and creates these ripples. And I feel incredibly grateful that I'm here to tell the tale. And I was never a great science student, and chemistry was not my thing, and I knew I was not going to medical school, but I knew that I wanted to give back in some way. And if I can do it through writing this book and through writing essays and articles, then I'm happy.
Well, I'm a big fan of what you're doing, Amy, and
Thank you.
Everyone needs to go out and get their copy of The Cast. It's out now. Amy, if people are just discovering you and your work, where can they find you online to get plugged in, to follow along, and to learn more about your story?
AmyBlumenfeld.com.
Excellent. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, and a link to The Cast where everyone can go buy their copy. Amy, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason yanked the coils of safety rope to one shoulder and heaved them out the attic window. The bundle bounced over the roofline and dropped to the yard below. He tightened the harness, making sure the shoulder straps were snug over his sweatshirt. He threaded his rope through the braking device, tested it, and clipped everything to the carabiner at his navel. So far, so good. Fireman Mike would be proud. His stomach flipped as he neared the octagonal window. Had he tied the correct knots? Would he get himself killed? Weeks had passed since Mike's tutorial but he had to attempt the break-in now, while both Van Brunts were at the Christmas Eve service. He swung his legs through the window and felt for the roof. His sneakers gripped the shingles and he wriggled out, grateful for once to have feet as big as snowshoes. He pulled on a ski mask and sang, "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can." He lowered his body. Wind punched him in the jaw like a supervillain, surprising him. His sweatshirt rode up and snow burrowed into his navel. He looked down but couldn't see his feet. He relaxed his hands and put a few ounces of weight on the rope. Clots of snow broke away, dove over the edge, and took far too long to hit ground. He drew his rope around the pipe and pulled tight. Now he could drop. No, you will not drop. You will rappel. You will rappel very safely. He backed towards the edge, towards the point of no return. The backyard lurched into view. It was a 4-story fall, and he'd probably hit the stairs on the way down. He sledded helplessly. His legs fell, swung, and kicked the side of the house. Alarm bells went off in his head. He gripped the rope. It looked like nothing. A shoelace. Jason Crane, you're a damn fool. He went limp and fell over. The rope gave a jolt, and the harness tried to castrate him. He twisted, trying to save his poor descendants. He began to spin. His arm bashed through a row of icicles. The spin slowed, reversed, and at last he came to a stop with his back to the house, dangling over the backyard. "Thank you, rope. That's a good rope. Well done." He tried to turn around, but couldn't. With patience, he worked out a method of kicking in circles and managed to press his sneakers to the side of the house. He needed slack. He gathered his loose rope to the small of his back and disengaged the brake. Zip! He fell fast, all his weight on the rope now. His feet, planted, shot up over his head. The brake caught him, and the rope vibrated as wildly as a guitar string striking a note of panic. Jason heard a crunching sound and looked up. The leaf gutter crumpled and poured a stream of bitter ice water into his eyes. He snarled and wiped his face, dripping humiliation. Jason rested a moment and stared at his reflection in the glass. He was an enormous Macy's balloon drifting over New Jersey, tethered at the navel like Underdog. "How the hell did you get up here, kid?" He did an awkward split, one foot above the window and the other below, hanging sideways with his weight on one hip. He closed his eyes and reached for the sill, crouching against the side of the house. His fingernails found the weather stripping, and he tugged. Locked. He cursed and tugged again, anger rising. He grabbed the frame with both hands and pulled with all his spider strength. Something popped. The window rose and the curtains splashed out. Jason dove headfirst into the fabric, wriggled and kicked, let out some rope and fell with a whump into his archenemy's lair.